Thank you, Vitali. Hi, everyone. My name is Rinaldo. Thank you for joining this session. I am a UX auditor at Baymard Institute, and today I will talk to you about Baymard's 6 mobile UX findings from testing the world's leading e-commerce sites. So essentially, Baymard is an independent web usability research institute, and we conduct large-scale e-commerce usability testing. And since 2009, that's been over 78,000 hours of research on all aspects of the e-commerce user experience, from form field usability to the entire mobile experience. And today we'll just cover just a subset of those findings. And when we're not conducting our large-scale research at Baymard, we do client work for companies like these, and our research is used by more than 3,000 brands, agencies, researchers, UX designers across 80 plus countries, and including 71% of all Fortune 500 e-commerce companies as well. So before I dive in, just for context sake, I will quickly introduce Baymard's research methodology and the structure of our research foundation, just so you are aware how we actually come up with these insights that we will cover in a short while. So all of our findings are based on 78,000 hours of testing e-commerce sites. Specifically, they're based on 2,700 qualitative, moderated in-lab usability test sessions following the Think Aloud protocol. So it's real users testing live e-commerce sites. And then we also combine that with in-lab eye tracking studies and then also quantitative studies spanning almost 15,000 participants. So from testing desktop and mobile websites from more than 90 leading US and European brands, we found that actually users run into more than 20,000 specific and preventable usability issues. And we've managed to distill all of these issues into over 600 unique and weighted UX guidelines that show the exact design patterns that we've observed in testing to consistently cause issues for users, but then, of course, also design patterns that consistently solve these issues as well. And also what we've done is we've taken all of these 600 plus weighted guidelines and then manually benchmarked them across 123 leading e-commerce sites. And this has led to one of the world's most comprehensive e-commerce UX benchmark databases with more than 160,000 UX performance scores and 105,000 best and worst practice examples. And this is very powerful for understanding the current state of the e-commerce industry, the competitive landscape, missed and strategic opportunities, along with, of course, providing you with endless performance verified best practice examples, some of which we'll take a look at today. And we bundle all of this into our Baymard Premium Research Catalog, and this is where the findings of today's presentation actually come from. So as mentioned, at Baymard, we've created this large benchmark database, one of the largest ones out there, aiming to basically help you understand what the current e-commerce landscape looks like. And to date, we've benchmarked over 123 sites across 15 different industries. And what we see here is the UX performance for mobile web. So the key takeaway here is we look at the top of this scorecard is that the average overall e-commerce mobile web experience is still mediocre. While these experiences are getting a bit better than what we observed a few years ago, we still find that many sites fail to accommodate common end user shopping behavior. So it's not that there aren't good mobile e-commerce experiences out there, it's just that some sites have perfected their search experience or their product page experience or their checkout experience. But we find that there aren't many major sites that do a great job in all of these areas and achieve a really good, fully optimized mobile e-commerce experience. So some sites perform very highly in specific areas, as you can see in this scorecard, but no site has, as of yet at least, been able to put all of this together to create basically a state-of-the-art mobile e-commerce experience. So also 63% of mobile users actually abandon a site during some of the common product finding tasks solely due to preventable usability issues. And the most severe and the most common issue users face when browsing mobile e-commerce sites is a lack of page overview. And during Baymard's large-scale testing, most of the users' issues with either finding, understanding, and interacting with page content basically stemmed from users being unable to have a good sense of the page layout and interface as a whole. So on mobile, of course, users are forced to view a page in chunks. So what they see is usually confined to what will fit within the mobile viewport. And then, of course, this can lead to users missing out on important information, selecting incorrect options, or even drawing conclusions that are not necessarily correct. So as we take a look at these issues surrounding a lack of page overview, it's important that you kind of get the most accurate perspective. So you'll notice that many of the examples that we were going to be presenting today are shown in a mobile viewport. So many, not all, but it's just important when making decisions that consider a user's lack of page overview. It's just good to try to avoid full page screenshots, and because this often gives an inaccurate representation of what the user is seeing and experiencing. So review the site like the user would. Use similar viewport sizes that your users would experience as well. Of course, it doesn't mean that mobile users have to always struggle, and there are plenty of things that a site can do to aid the user. And today we're going to look at 6 improvements that will mitigate the issues that most sites struggle with. I would like to point out that it does take a lot more than this, but these at least will give you somewhere to start. We'll cover basically and focus on one issue that stood out during mobile research from homepage, main navigation, product page, and then also cart and checkout. So let's get started. The first area we'll take a look at is the homepage. So when landing on a new site at the homepage during our large-scale usability testing, 70% of users scrolled up and down through the entire homepage just to establish an overview. So users want to know what their options are before deciding what to choose. And users new to the brand will also try to infer what they can expect to find based on the homepage design. So exactly what is the issue here? So take these 3 sites as an example here. So if I ask you, for example, a question, which site out of these 3 would sell baby toys? Which site would you select? A, B, or C? You can mentally answer this for yourself. You can post it in the chat. Just try to mentally guess which site would be able to offer you baby toys in this particular instance. What about, for instance, hairbrushes? Would you expect to find a hairbrush on site C or site A or site B? What about, for instance, sunscreen or exercise mats? And then finally, speakers. So you can try to kind of connect these product types with these various product designs or website designs here, whether that's site A, site B, or site C. Now, in all fairness, this is a trick question because the answer is that all of these 3 sites offer all of these product types that are listed in the slide here. So users that are new to any of these companies here will not be able to tell from first glance whether they will be able to find what they need on these sites. And on mobile, it's even more important to highlight on the homepage the different types of products users can find on a site. Because on desktop sites, users can, of course, benefit from exposed product categories in the main navigation. However, on mobile sites and on mobile apps, product categories aren't visible in the main navigation, at least not permanently. And users are therefore even more reliant on the homepage to basically try to understand or to infer the type of site until they can access the main navigation. And of course, during testing, we see this time and time again. Such misinterpretations can be seriously harmful to a site because users typically won't look for a type of product they don't believe the site will carry. And then this, of course, can potentially lead to lost sales, both in the short term and the long term, because, of course, these users will go elsewhere to get these product needs met. So let's explore what can we do about this. So Baymer's testing revealed that there are some homepage designs that can help users understand what is on offer. And in order to kind of avoid users misinterpreting or even underestimating the site's product range, it is recommended, and especially for sites selling a broad range of items, to basically try to manifest the breadth of the product catalog on the homepage. Or in other words, just simply feature a broad range of product types directly on the homepage. So just a glance over the homepage should indicate the site's product diversity. So primarily that means showing some categories directly on the homepage. Of course, particularly important or particularly popular categories should take significant portions of the homepage screen real estate, but to avoid having first-time users underestimate the site's product catalog, some space must be dedicated to other product types as well. So in general, there should be enough diversity on the homepage to kind of help set correct site expectations. And this is not just for novice or new users. Frequent visitors also during our testing use these links almost as shortcuts to get where they wanted to go. And it's also worth pointing out that this information is utilized by users even if the elements aren't tapped. So they still during testing used it to kind of try to infer what the site has to offer, even though your potential web analytics wouldn't necessarily show that. So if we take a look at some of these designs here that we have in this slide, during our testing, we basically observed that featuring a diverse set of the top level navigational text links directly on the homepage also solved this issue. So the limited viewport of mobile devices basically ensures that the text links would receive much more focused exposure than they would on a desktop site, because oftentimes on mobile, the only thing that users can see are these navigational links, as opposed to desktop, where you usually have many other visual elements competing for users' attention, so to speak. So as we can see from these examples or implementations, some sites displayed the entire top level hierarchy, like build.com here in the middle, on the homepage. And then other sites relied on a mix of visually featured categories and then the entire hierarchy, like in this first screenshot here from Williams Sonoma. And then some sites such as Amazon in the last example used a mix of visually featured products, visually featured categories, and then they also displayed a select part of the top level hierarchy links as well. So all of these approaches can work, and they do work during a large scale testing. But the most important thing is that you need to display a sufficient diversity of products on your homepage. And more sites are using this approach to help users, with the majority of mobile sites in Baymard's benchmark database showing primary categories directly on the homepage. And this is greatly improved from 2020. So when we measure this in 2020, 78% of sites didn't display primary categories on the homepage. And in 2021, 45% of sites neglected to do so. And actually, in our most recent benchmark, no sites showed less than 40% of their primary categories on the homepage. And because of that, of course, there's no hard and fast rule regarding what percentage of product types should be featured on the homepage. Our testing revealed that at a minimum, you should aim to showcase around 40% of product types on the homepage. Of course, not every product type will be featured at that percentage, but at the very least, users will get an overall sense of the site's breadth of products on the homepage. So just to sum up this first issue quickly, it's important that any site visually portrays a product catalog breadth so that the users can easily infer the type of products they will be able to find on the site itself. And then a trick to help you accomplish that, especially on mobile, are text links. So text links can be used in place or in addition to images and thumbnails. Now we'll talk a bit about how to design the main navigation on mobile devices, and 52% of all mobile sites in our database have this particular issue. So let's start by looking at the desktop main navigation. So this is a typical desktop main navigation. Most sites now would have a menu that would be similar to this, both in terms of design and mechanics. So on desktop, users can basically hover the main navigational item and then often see all the site's parent categories and subcategories at once. So it's relatively easy for users to basically get an idea of the products sold on the site and then the site's hierarchy as well. However, also, for instance, here, the ability to go broad scopes, like clicking shoes, as in this example, is very important for users, because users don't always know what they're looking for, and then they will start their journey at broad scopes because it wouldn't make sense for them to narrow down or go narrow scopes, such as basketball shoes or anything like that, before they would see what the site has to offer. So on desktop, basically clicking this parent item in the main navigation, such as here for Adidas shoes, it is a simple, and it would be a simple way for users to access broad category scopes. However, is this even possible to do on mobile? So let's explore and unpack that a bit. So if we look at any example of a mobile main navigation, we would usually be presented with a dilemma. So when a user would tap on one of these items in the mobile main navigation, should that action expand the subcategories, or should it take users to the landing page for that particular broad main navigational item? So in this instance, should, for instance, tapping dry dog food reveal the subcategory options, or should it take the user to the dry dog food category page or product listing page? So how do we actually resolve this conundrum here on mobile? It's quite a challenge, actually, and there are a number of different design patterns that sites implement, and there are actually two that are quite popular, but we find during testing to perform poorly. So let's explore those two first, just to know what to avoid. So firstly, there is this design pattern of just having the main navigation keep expanding. And here you can see it on Sephora. I'll play this video example here. So basically, users can just continue to click through the main navigation or tap through the main navigation, just peeling back layers and layers of category navigation here. And here, no broad parent category scope is apparently accessible because the user only has the option to continue drilling down until eventually they reach a product list that might be of interest to them. So if the user is trying to obtain access to a broader scope like makeup or anything like that, it's not really clear to users how to do that in this implementation from a Sephora here. So some users, some mobile users especially, didn't know that there was any other choice than just selecting main navigation items until a product list was reached. So users that wanted the broader list didn't realize they could just tap the header of the currently viewed category to get a broader list of products. So here at Sephora, users can indeed tap makeup, but users consistently didn't do that during our testing. And the problem we see in our testing, and that's not just the case with Sephora, but all sites that would use a similar design pattern, is that users, even when they want this broader view, they didn't realize they can tap the headers. And of course, some users did realize that, but the majority of the users don't realize that this is necessary to go to this broad scope. Just most see it as just a simple text label that's in the main navigation. Also, remember the first time in that previous video when the user tapped on it and it didn't go to the broad scope, it just revealed a sub option. So that's also in this particular implementation sets the wrong expectation on the user's side of things as well. Another implementation choice that we see during our testing is having multiple hit areas within the main navigation. So if I play this video here, in this clothing category here at Perry Ellis, we can see that users can, first of all, tap directly on the microcopy, in this case for tops, for instance. The user would click tops here, and then they will be able to see all tops. However, there's also another interaction point within this main navigation. So the user can basically go back and they can tap the arrow at the end of the tops row to expand additional subcategories to consider here. Now, this extremely subtle approach of having these multiple hit areas within each menu item will be lost on many users, and it was lost during our testing, either because users were completely unfamiliar with the concept and they had to learn something brand new while on the site, or because this concept itself was implemented inconsistently across sites or even on the same site. And as we saw during this video, the users really don't immediately interact with either the word tops or the arrow icon at the end of the row, and instead they just click or tap in the center. So this indicates that they are expecting the entire section to be a single hit area. So because of that, this design pattern is also not optimal in terms of showcasing or conveying the main navigation options. Instead, a better design pattern is to utilize a view all category link. So here in this implementation, it is abundantly clear how the user can proceed to narrower scopes by just basically peeling the layers of the category taxonomy, or access much broader scopes thanks to this view all category or all jeans or whatever the case might be within the main navigation. However, when we benchmarked this particular implementation, 28% of mobile sites do not offer this as an option in their main navigation. So this implementation would allow the header to be tappable. It would match users' expectations for hit areas, and it would avoid confusion over which part of the menu item will provide more information or lead to a product list. So this is also a beneficial implementation for desktop sites as well, even though we're just talking about mobile here. But of course, some sites do not make it particularly clear how to select the parent scope. So this is also something that can be, in that sense, platform agnostic as well. Two important points here when it comes to implementing these kind of main navigation scopes is that one being is that view all or see all should always come before the category name. Like here in this implementation from Adidas here, where the item reads all women's shoes. So that's one detail. Secondly, it's important that this view all category option is shown as the first choice in the list. So testing revealed that placing it anywhere else made it really difficult for users to find this option. And this is important because users looking for those broad scopes will be unlikely to scan a complete list of these detailed subcategories. So having a view all, for instance, at the bottom or in the middle of this list would basically break with the typical information architecture for a nested hierarchy, because you would expect that the parent item would always come before the children nested within it, right? So if it's at the top, the user is immediately made aware. They can see the broadest category scope, or to continue to narrow down their choices if that's what they wish to do. So that's the best performing pattern for implementing the errata scopes. It's just by simply having the all category option at the top of that scope in main navigation. Our next issue is found on product details pages. So one of the most basic usability questions is, where am I on this particular site? And this is something that every site must address, or users will quickly feel lost, or in some cases actually get lost while browsing. And in Baymar's large-scale testing, when users were stuck in a navigational sense, they went directly to the page header and then the page footer to look for clues. And we can leverage that behavior to help the user. So on the pages where breadcrumbs were provided, they were used repeatedly. So breadcrumbs during our testing serve multiple useful purposes. First of all, they clarify the scope of the page. They let the user know what their current position in the site hierarchy is, because we have to remember the main navigation is collapsed on mobile. And they also serve as easy cross-navigational and scope jumping options for the user. And this is most important for non-linear navigation, meaning some users will arrive to your site from external social media traffic, external search, ads, email links, or anything like that. For them, the product page itself will be a landing page. So that they're the ones who need the ability to orient themselves the most. And actually, when we measure this in 2021, 51% of mobile sites lacked this versus 24% on desktop. So this would obviously indicate that breadcrumbs get killed in the mobile design process, despite being even more important on mobile than on desktop. And our last benchmark would actually show that only 14% of mobile sites still lack breadcrumbs on the product page. So perfect mobile breadcrumbs do exist, though they're very hard to find, both when it comes to our research. It's very, very difficult to find breadcrumbs that are designed that would basically align with the most common user behavior we see during our testing. So we'll start off with some recommendations in terms of what not to do when it comes to designing breadcrumbs for product pages. So here we have two implementation examples, one from Sports Direct and the other one from Macy's. What would you do here in order to optimize these two designs in terms of the breadcrumbs on these product pages? So you can spend 10, 15 seconds here just mentally trying to come up with some ideas and solutions in terms of how to resolve any of these issues, if any issues, in your opinion, would be present in these two designs. So hopefully you have some ideas here. And the reason why we feature these two examples is that these two designs are pretty representative of the issues we come across during our testing. So our first example here shows that it's possible to include too many breadcrumb paths. So users really don't benefit from the root path and the page they're on currently being shown in breadcrumbs. Reason for that: the current page is already presented via product title, so it's just basically duplicating the product you're looking at already. And then also the root path, we found during testing that users have developed this mental model. If they want to go to the home page, they can simply tap on the logo on the mobile version of the site or use the main navigation together. So even when home root paths were present in breadcrumbs, they were really not used that much either. And then the second example here is just on the other end of the spectrum. It just is also possible to show too few breadcrumbs. And here Macy's has tried to help the user but they removed some key factors here. So it's not even clear from this breadcrumb implementation where are the subcategories, where is the access to the list of items that the user might have spent so long curating. Maybe they've applied some filters, etc. So it's not really clear. Users can't really go one level back in Macy's implementation. They can only go to a very broad scope. And then also there's only two elements available there in the breadcrumbs. So instead, we suggest, based on our testing, to invest in creating accurate and full hierarchy and history breadcrumbs for your user. So hierarchy breadcrumbs, like we, for instance, see in the first image, would allow the user to basically navigate back to an earlier point in their journey. However, there's also something that we call history breadcrumbs. As we can see here, for instance, from Victoria's Secret in the second screenshot here, this design would help the user return to their previous list, which is particularly helpful if the user had set filters or sorting boundaries. So this back button in the breadcrumb element here in the second screenshot would enable users to return to their previous product list with all of their filters and sorting directions preserved. So if the user applied some filters or applied some sorting directions, if the user would tap on the back button, their hard work would still be preserved. And then also in the third implementation example here, we have history breadcrumbs from search. So users on this particular site use some search queries to hopefully be able to find something. They might have landed on search results page, once again, potentially applied some filters. And when they would open the product page, history breadcrumb would be available. So the user would have the option to tap the back button, and then all their hard work would be preserved. But like I said earlier, perfection is not as easy as it looks, especially when it comes to these breadcrumbs. Even these examples here have some issues. It's really difficult for us to find really solid implementations when it comes to breadcrumbs. For instance, as you can see from the first example alone, once again, the home is present as a pathway, which is not needed, like we said earlier. And then also just a general issue with all of these three implementations is that these hit areas are just simply too small. So our general recommendation is to ensure all hit areas on mobile are at least 7 by 7 millimeters. So anything smaller than that will be too difficult for users to hit, and it will cause either minor interruptions, but also sometimes complete disorientation for users. So in that sense, these implementation examples are not perfect, but in terms of especially hierarchy breadcrumbs, they are a good inspiration to start with. We now move into the cart. Well, we basically take a look at missed opportunity by over 85% of sites from our benchmark database. And we can kick it off here with a direct quote from Baymard's large-scale user testing. As you can see here from the quote, this user liked adding prospective items to their cart almost as a way to add them to a wish list. And the cart usually is an easy place to access for users. It's accessible in the majority of the cases without having to create an account, and the user can basically start comparing items in the cart whenever they're ready for that. And our large-scale testing has revealed that up to 25% of users consistently add multiple products to their cart without absolutely any intention of purchasing any of them, but only to compare them in the cart later on. And this came up multiple times in our large-scale testing and basically showed us that users will often utilize their shopping cart as a temporary storage and comparison tool. 3 times as many users use the cart rather than a site-provided save or favorite feature or whatever it's called on that particular site. And then we've also conducted some quantitative testing, and it also showed that using the cart to store items is still utilized over a wish list or save feature. About 42% of users add items to a cart to save products that they're not ready to purchase yet. So how the cart list items are designed determines if this subgroup of users can easily use the cart for comparison and evaluation of those added products. So with this in mind, let's explore how to best design that particular cart. So cart design should work, as we just covered, as a personalized product list, meaning it should allow users to store and compare items of interest. So the first thing that we have to take care of is to ensure that the product always links back to the actual product page for users that need to clarify product details or just want to check on information. So that's the first thing. Also, it's important to provide decent thumbnail sizes, especially for visually driven products, so that users are able to compare items clearly and also to confirm that they've added a correct item, especially when it comes to visually driven products where users might be adding different color variations or anything like that. So if the thumbnail is not sufficiently sized, it will be very difficult for users to compare those different items in the cart. However, for spec-driven products, it's important to include full product titles because the titles would help the user check that what they've added is what they need, especially as some product variations are very subtle. So for example, if you're adding multiple laptops, the product thumbnail alone will not indicate that one laptop has 4 gigabytes of RAM while the other one would have 8 gigabytes of RAM. So for spec-driven products, titles are really important. They need to contain basically all the specifications for that particular item. After that, it's recommended to show clear edit tools in the event that user needs to make any changes, particularly helpful for products with variations such as size or color. So user can use that edit button to change the variation or adjust the variation to the one they would prefer to purchase. And then after that, it's also recommended to describe cart persistence. So to aid those users who are utilizing the cart as a storage tool, so they basically know how long the items will be retained in that particular cart. And for instance, in the second screenshot here, Bed Bath & Beyond even has this option to email the cart content to themselves. That way they can basically preserve everything that they've added to the cart previously as well. However, with all of these details that we've covered that are important to pay attention to when designing the cart, 85% of mobile sites have issues just with these first 3 points. So once again, users sometimes use their cart to compare and store products. It's preferred over a wish list or a favorite feature on the site, but many will find it difficult to use the cart if it's not optimized to facilitate that comparison. And these little details here would represent a couple of ways to go about optimizing the cart for comparison. So that's something to consider as well. Our next step is the checkout. So users spend obviously a lot of time focusing on any empty or open form fields, and this includes whether they need to complete information or whether they can bypass it. And throughout the years, Beymer have been conducting many quantitative studies on the reason for abandonment during checkout. And of the reasons people gave as to why they abandon a site during checkout, they're basically a group of reasons that are completely in websites' control. Now, there's many of these reasons, and we don't have time to cover all of them. We're just going to take a look at this one. So the fact that there was a too long or complicated checkout process, and we'll see how to basically aid the user in that kind of perceived friction that they might encounter during the checkout flow. So here we have 2 checkout designs. And the question here is, which of these 2 sites would require the phone field to be completed? Now, when you look at these 2 examples, so one, the first screenshot would have the form field label contact number, mobile preferred, and then the other one would have, please provide at least one phone number as we may need to contact you about your delivery. Now, from first glance, it's not really immediately clear, even with this microcopy on the right, this is Argos on the right, it's not really apparent what form field has to be completed here in order for the user to be able to proceed to the next step. And fun fact here with Argos on the right, even though the microcopy states that the site only needs one of these fields to be completed, an error will still be returned if the first mobile phone number field is not filled in. So what information is optional and what's required varies from site to site. So on some sites, phone number would be optional, while other sites would require it. Some sites would not require card holder names. Some don't even require email. So there's no official standard or rule for what a site does or does not need from the user. So basically, the user has to depend on the site to tell them what it requires. And in Beymer's large-scale testing, 32% of users encountered a validation error as they tried to complete the form fields because one of the fields was required and it was not marked as required. And thanks to that overall lack of page overview that we talked about at the beginning of the session, users will have to try and infer what is or is not needed based on the other fields on that particular page. And then the viewport limits the amount of information available to the user at any given time, so they have to scroll and search for any available context, or if that's not helpful to them, they just simply guess, and then that of course leads to potential validation errors as well. Even when all fields are required during our testing, it still causes doubt until this information is explicitly stated. So even stating something like all fields are required somewhere on the page is unfortunately not enough for users. It's also not enough to only mark required fields or only mark optional fields. You can't assume that users will know what fields will be needed by a site and which ones wouldn't. Most fields in a form usually are required. However, only explicitly marking optional fields has the downside of it being relatively difficult to pick up on what other fields are optional as well. And users will only have relatively few fields to detect this pattern in terms of how optional fields or required fields are marked. So these kind of blanket statements, such as all fields are required, really do not help as much in our testing. That's been verified. And also only marking some of the fields will still leave users to misinterpret the fields themselves. However, obviously there's always a solution, and this one is to just simply mark both required and optional fields. When that is done, users don't have to deduce if a field is optional or if a field is required by looking at other fields at that page when every field has a clear label next to it. And if this looks overly simple to you, bear in mind that we measured this and we benchmarked this particular usability guideline, and 71% of mobile sites only denote fields to be either optional or required. 71% of them do not do both. And 29% of mobile sites do not communicate required or optional fields at all. So by marking fields both as optional and required has various benefits as verified during our large-scale testing, including a reduced form completion time. And there's basically just a vast reduction in the needless error of this is a required field that the users have to resolve. And then, of course, unnecessary uncertainty and friction the user has to encounter during the entire checkout flow is also removed. In terms of actually highlighting these fields, for required form fields, an asterisk will suffice for marking required fields, and then the word optional typically needs to be written in full for clarity on optional form fields. In terms of whether you want to position these in form labels or as placeholders in the form fields themselves, or even below the form fields, it really doesn't matter. During our large-scale testing, we haven't found one implementation to outperform the other as long as that information is communicated. That's all that matters. The last set of insights that we will share today is about optimizing for mobile keyboards. So we'll cover 3 insights here, and 85% of sites get 1 or more wrong, while 60% get at least 2 wrong. So let's take a look at what these are and why they pose issues to the user. So the number 1 here is to disable autocorrect when the dictionary is weak. So many touch keyboards have an autocorrect feature built in. That's helpful when users are writing a message to their friend, when they're updating their social media statuses, but it's less helpful when users are in the middle of a checkout on mobile. And 79% of mobile sites don't do this. And what we see happening during our testing is that correct inputs are replaced with incorrect ones. So like our user here, who is having their address input be updated to milligrams. So for the user that noticed this, it's just a bit annoying. They have to go back, they have to correct this incorrect information before they can proceed further. But for those users that don't notice this, it can actually be quite harmful because they might not receive their order if the city or address or even their name is auto-corrected without their knowledge. So that's why we recommend to disable autocorrect for name, address, and city. And this is what we mean when we say disable autocorrect when the dictionary is weak. Users do not need dictionary assistance to type in their name, address, or the city. That's why it's worth it to turn off autocorrect for these particular form fields. And here's the code example basically you can use to accomplish this. It's just a matter of targeting the autocorrect attribute in the HTML code and then setting it as off. It's just as simple as that. All of these implementations and examples that we will cover, all three of them, are just a matter of easy fixes. It doesn't take weeks or months to resolve any of these issues. It's just a matter of auditing all your form fields and seeing if these correct attributes are either turned off or correctly set. The number two here is to invoke touch keyboards consistently. And this might sound odd, but it's actually an issue at 54% of mobile sites. So 54%. So a user, for instance, in this first example here, taps into the credit card number field, and they are presented with a numeric keyboard. So that's perfect. The credit card number input is always numerical, so an appropriate keyboard is invoked. However, when they would tap into the security code field, the keyboard becomes alpha only. So when this happened during testing and when users encountered issues like these, they were obviously very confused. Some would even start to question whether their input was correct. They would start to interpret uh, whether they landed on the correct form field. And then, of course, they would lose confidence in proceeding further in the checkout. And this is another example of just needless friction for the user that could have otherwise been avoided. So our suggestion, based on a large-scale testing, is to always use appropriate keyboard layouts for numeric inputs, phone, and email as well. And these two implementation examples, for instance, here at Barnes & Noble, the numeric keyboard was displayed for the credit card field and also for the security code field as well. And then also in the right image, we have an input field that's set as type email. So notice how in this keyboard, the space button is now shrunk because there's room now for two buttons that are particularly useful when you type in your email, and that's the @ symbol and then also a full stop character. So it's important that when users land on an appropriate, on any particular form field, that an appropriate keyboard is invoked. And but what we also see during our testing is that users mistype very often on mobile devices. So we might as well offer users as much help as possible. Because, for instance, in this previous example, when you would have something like an alpha keyboard for a numerical input, users, of course, can access numbers. However, if they do that, the size of that particular key is 400% smaller than it would be if you invoke an appropriate keyboard like on the left here. So we might as well give as much help to the user as we can. And that 400% difference is, for example, for an iPhone 11 Pro device. For other devices, of course, it will differ, but it just goes to show that we can assist users when they type in any of their data. And then lastly, the suggestion here is to disable auto capitalization on email. 27% of mobile sites currently do not do this. So in mobile usability testing, users frequently went back and actively deleted the first auto capital letters because they feared any potential email delivery issues. Users generally explained that they were unsure if uppercase characters were allowed in email or if email addresses in general were case sensitive. So therefore, the recommendation is also to simply disable that as well. Most modern browsers do this automatically these days when you specify that it's an email form field. That's why that previous step is also important, but we still, of course, recommend it to double check and to see if it's disabled for legacy purposes as well. And then also here's the code snippet example in terms of how to basically target that particular attribute as well. You can actually find this cheat sheet at this URL where you basically are able to find all of these appropriate keyboard types and when to use them. All of them have descriptions, demos, and then codes that you can use, code snippets that you can use to potentially turn these correct attributes either on or off. So we've seen some of these mobile usability issues that basically impact the homepage, main navigation, product pages, and the checkout flow. So as long as users are browsing on devices with comparatively small screens, they will continue to suffer from a lack of overview of the page as well. And these would be the kind of 6 improvements that you can implement to kind of mitigate these issues of users having a complete lack of page overview. And once again, they are on the homepage. about displaying some of your primary categories directly on the homepage. And then for main navigation, we talked about having that view all option as the first item within all category scopes. We also covered how to design a hierarchy breadcrumb, and also don't forget about history breadcrumbs as well. That's also something important. And then for cart is about designing the cart so they can serve users as a personalized product list. And it's important to have large thumbnails, full titles, and then link back to product pages from those particular list items. And then we also talked about denoting both required and optional form fields in the checkout or in any sign up form. It doesn't have to be only checkout related. And then lastly, we touched on using these three details when it comes to optimizing for touch keyboards as well. But of course, like I said at the beginning, these 6 won't cut it. It's just an okay start. Most of these that we covered today also don't require a lot of effort in terms of implementing them. But like I said at the beginning, during our large-scale testing, we currently have identified more than 350 mobile parameters or issues similar to these 6 that all, of course, need to align in order for you to design or create smooth a mobile e-commerce experience. And also, the average mobile website has over 100 UX issues in various places. And currently in our research catalog in Beymer Premium, we have over 350 actionable UX guidelines that can help alleviate these issues and help you minimize possible pain points and friction your users are experiencing. And then also a very important data point from the beginning of the presentation as well is that our large-scale testing shows that 63% of mobile users abandon the site during these common product finding tasks solely due to preventable usability issues. So this is something that we can actively work towards as web professionals in terms of helping or aiding users to achieve their tasks. So all of these are aspects that one site would have in its own control. And at Beymer.com, or even more precisely, our blog, you'll find more than 300 free articles, and each of them is basically covering a single finding, just like the issues that we've discussed today. So if you want to learn more about it, that's a great way to basically continue doing that. It's absolutely free. It's not gated. None of the content is gated. You can just visit our blog and read more about that as well. And then also, like Vitaly mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we'll also be going deeper into all of these during our UX for Mobile e-commerce masterclass training. So on each day of the workshop, we will actually cover topics that represent some of these core pillars of a user's online shopping experience. And each session will last approximately 2.5 hours. So that will obviously enable us to go more in depth in any of these issues. And of course, all of these topics and research findings will also be applied through group exercise sessions as well. So if that's of interest, you can visit that link as well or check out the workshops on Smashing's site. The first workshop is kicking off on Monday. Alrighty, if you ever want to get in touch, here's my email if you have any questions, even after this presentation. Yeah, thank you for listening, everyone.
All right. Wow, that was packed, as it always is. Thank you so much, Rinaldo, for all the insights. We have so many questions. I don't even know where to start. But I think maybe just before we go into the panel together, maybe just 2 quick questions, hopefully with a relatively quick answer as well about the topic that you, kind of some of the issues that you covered. One came from Andrea wondering, for recurring users, would you recommend to pre-fill data from previous purchases or not?
Yes, if that's possible. We have actually usability guidelines in our research catalog. For instance, one usability guideline we have for a card holder name. So first of all, we recommend avoiding card holder name if it's not needed for credit card validation. However, if that's the case, if you need it to process with your payment processor, then you can just forward the data from the shipping step to that particular form field. And you should be able to do that, and you should do that whenever you have that option. So pre-filling, definitely we highly encourage it.
Okay, what about validation? Inline validation and submit, what is better in e-commerce?
Inline validation is also something we can recommend based on our large-scale testing. We also have a usability guideline based on that. There's a couple of details when it comes to inline validation. It's important to avoid, first of all, premature validation, meaning as soon as you start typing something into the form field, validation being triggered. After that, as soon as the user would leave the form field, the inline validation should trigger. And then when the user will go back to that form field, ideally the error message should disappear as soon as the user would fix that error in that particular form field. It shouldn't disappear when the user leaves that form field. And then also on top of that, you can also use positive inline validations. We see most of the time inline validations is used for errors, but you can also use positive inline validation when the user would leave input that you basically can tell, okay, has an @ symbol, it has a top level domain, email is fine. You can also have something like a green check mark or color the border of that form field in green, and that way have positive inline validation. So that's also something to think about as well.